The last potluck Mildred Harlow ever cooked for was held on a cold Sunday in January 1982. Mount Olive Baptist Church in Rennes, Georgia fed 180 people that day on a budget under $30. Mildred was 71. Her hand-painted casserole carrier had ridden in the back seat of her Ford Galaxy every first Sunday since 1960. 3 months later, Mount Olive closed. Number 17 on this list was her signature dish. Number 9 cost under $2 and fed 30 people. Number 22 had her handwriting on the index card in the 1974 church cookbook. These are the 25 church potluck recipes from the 1970s no one brings anymore. They were how a generation of women wrote their names into a community. Hit subscribe, let us count down. Number 25, tuna noodle casserole. This was the dish a widow in Dayton, Ohio brought to First Methodist every single Wednesday night supper from 1971 until 1979. Her name was Louise Kemp. She made it with egg noodles, 2 cans of chicken of the sea tuna at 39 cents each, a can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup at 21 cents, a half cup of milk, and a sleeve of crushed potato chips sprinkled on top. The whole dish cost her $1.12. It fed 12 people. Louise had outlived her husband by 19 years and her only son by 4. The casserole was her way of walking into a room where people still expected her to bring something. And the pan came out of the oven bubbling, the chips gone gold and crisp. Somewhere between your parking lot and your fellowship hall, that dish had already done its quiet work. It said she was still here. That mattered. Number 24, funeral potatoes. Relief Society. Women in Provo, Utah made this dish for every grieving family in the state from the late 60s onward. The recipe was frozen shredded hash browns, a can of cream of chicken soup, sour cream, melted butter, shredded cheddar, and a topping of crushed cornflakes tossed in more butter. 9 by 13 pan, 90 cents of ingredients, fed 25 mourners easily. It was the dish that arrived on your doorstep 20 minutes after the phone call, still warm, wrapped in a tea towel, left without a knock. You did not have to open your door. You did not have to talk. The pan told you the whole thing. Someone knew, someone cooked, someone drove across town in the cold because there was nothing else they could give you. But the Mormon Relief Society did not invent grief. They invented a way to show up for it that did not need words. Number 23, 7-layer salad. A high school secretary named Doris Haverkamp in Peoria, Illinois, brought this to her Lutheran church social every May from 1972 onward. Iceberg lettuce on the bottom, chopped celery, frozen peas, still frozen when they went in, sliced red onion, shredded cheddar, a thick seal of Miracle Whip spread corner to corner, crumbled bacon on top. It had to be layered in a clear glass Pyrex bowl so the colors showed through like stained glass. Doris made it the night before and refrigerated it, which was the whole point. The mayonnaise kept everything crisp for 24 hours. When the lid came off at noon, your bowl looked like a garden pressed under glass. For a woman who spent her weekdays typing other people's letters, the Sunday salad was the one thing in her week that had her handwriting on it. Number 22, Watergate salad. The recipe was printed on the back of a Jell-O pistachio pudding box in 1975, the year instant pistachio pudding came out. A Chicago food columnist renamed it, and a congregation in Rolla, Missouri put it on every potluck table for the next 15 years. 1 box of pudding mix, 1 can of crushed pineapple with the juice, a tub of Cool Whip, a cup of mini marshmallows, and a handful of chopped pecans. Green as a golf green, sweet as a wedding cake. Mildred Harlow made this one too, and her handwriting was on the index card in the 1974 Mount Olive cookbook. She wrote, "Shut the gate salad" at the top in blue ballpoint because that was what her sister called it. The recipe was simple, but the reason it disappeared is not. Instant pudding went out of fashion. Cool Whip became a punchline. The women who knew what shut the gate meant stopped being around to explain it to you. Number 21, Ambrosia salad. Southern Baptist women in Mobile, Alabama served this at every Easter potluck, every homecoming Sunday, and every wedding reception held in a church fellowship hall from 1968 through the early 80s. Canned mandarin oranges, drained. Canned pineapple chunks, drained. Flaked coconut. Miniature marshmallows. A cup of sour cream folded through. Chopped pecans if the budget allowed. Maraschino cherries on top because the red mattered. Ambrosia meant food of the gods in Greek mythology, but in a Baptist basement it meant something closer to a woman saying she had thought about you. She had opened 3 cans. She had drained them in the colander over your church kitchen sink. She had folded the sour cream in the way her grandmother had shown her, and she had brought it in a crystal bowl she kept wrapped in a pillowcase in the linen closet. That bowl mattered. The pillowcase mattered. Every layer was a decision made on a Saturday night for a Sunday afternoon she would not be paid for. Number 20. Broccoli rice casserole. A Baptist deacon's wife in Greenville, South Carolina, named Evelyn Crouch made this every 5th Sunday from 1973 until her hip went out in 1989. Long-grain white rice, a package of frozen chopped broccoli, a half-pound of Velveeta cut into cubes, a can of cream of mushroom soup, a stick of butter, and a chopped onion sautéed together, baked 45 minutes at 350. The cheese melted into the rice, and the whole thing turned a color that does not exist in nature anymore. Evelyn used a 9 by 13 Pyrex with a chipped corner, and she wrapped it in a folded bath towel for the ride to the church. The recipe cost her about $2.40 in 1974 money. It fed 25 people. The dish still exists on the internet. But what does not exist anymore is a woman driving a station wagon with a casserole wrapped in a bath towel on your passenger seat because the heat would warp the vinyl. Number 19. Hawaiian meatballs. This was the dish a newlywed named Patricia Keene brought to her First Presbyterian Church potluck in Shaker Heights, Ohio in 1973. 2 pounds of ground beef rolled into walnut-sized balls, a jar of Welch's grape jelly, a bottle of Heinz chili sauce. The whole thing melted together in a Corningware chafing dish over a sterno flame, and by the time the crock bubbled, the meatballs were glazed in a sauce that was somehow both sweet and savory and impossible to describe. Patricia was 22. She had been married 8 months. The meatballs were her audition. Every church potluck for a young wife in the 1970s was an audition, whether anyone said it out loud or not. The older women tasted. They nodded. One wrote down the recipe in the margin of her bulletin. That was how Patricia knew she had passed. That was your whole test. Number 18. Tomato aspic. An Episcopalian woman named Margaret Royston in Charleston, South Carolina, brought this to every luncheon at St. Philip's from 1970 until 1984. 2 cans of V8 juice, 2 packets of Knox unflavored gelatin, a diced celery stalk, a tablespoon of Worcestershire, a dash of hot sauce, set in a ring mold and unmolded onto a bed of iceberg lettuce with a dollop of homemade mayonnaise in the center. It quivered. It was the color of a brick left out in the rain. Half the women at your table loved it. Half the women at your table could not swallow it. Margaret did not care. The aspic was a declaration. It said she had a ring mold, she had time on a Friday afternoon to make something that had to set overnight, and she had grown up in a house where a congealed salad was not a punchline, but a sign that lunch had been taken seriously. The aspic disappeared when the women who understood what your ring mold meant stopped throwing luncheons. Number 17. Deviled eggs. The dish that disappeared first. At Mildred Harlow's church in Rennes, Georgia, deviled eggs hit the potluck table and were gone before the preacher finished the blessing. Mildred made hers with 2 dozen eggs boiled on Saturday night, peeled on Sunday morning, yolks mashed with Duke's mayonnaise, a teaspoon of yellow mustard, sweet pickle relish, salt, and a dusting of paprika across the top. She arranged them on an egg plate her mother had given her in 1948, 24 indentations in green Fostoria glass, and she covered them with a square of saran wrap for the ride. The thing about deviled eggs at a church potluck is that they were never actually about the eggs. Bringing a potluck dish was more work than hosting. Mildred was up at 5 on Sunday. The eggs had to be cold enough to peel, the yolks had to be dry enough to crumble, the mayonnaise had to be stirred in by hand with a fork because an electric mixer made the filling slick. She had to boil the eggs 12 minutes, shock them in ice water, peel them under running water, cut them lengthwise with a knife she wiped between every egg, and pipe the filling through a plastic bag with the corner cut off. She had to carry the plate down the basement steps at Mount Olive without tipping it. She had to set it on the table so the paprika did not slide, and then she had to stand in line for her own eggs. Here is the thing most people miss about a church potluck. The potluck was not a meal. It was a performance that cost more in labor than a restaurant dinner, and it was more work than hosting a crowd in your own house would have been. Mildred did it 1,000 times. The eggs were gone in 90 seconds. That was the point. That was the whole religion of it. Number 16. Pimento cheese sandwiches. A church secretary in Greensboro, North Carolina named Ruby Tillman cut the crusts off 2 loaves of sunbeam white bread every Sunday morning from 1971 to 1983 for the First Baptist Fellowship Hour. She grated a block of extra sharp cheddar by hand. She mixed it with Duke's mayonnaise, diced pimentos from a small dromedary jar, cracked black pepper, and a dash of cayenne. She spread the mixture edge to edge on the soft white bread, stacked the slices, and cut them into 4 triangles with a serrated knife she dipped in warm water between cuts. 64 triangles, arranged on a silver platter, covered with a damp dish towel so your bread would not dry out on the drive. Ruby was a single mother. She made $48 a week as a church secretary. The sandwiches came out of her own grocery budget. Nobody ever asked her if she could afford it. Number 15. Coca-Cola cake. A grandmother in Birmingham, Alabama named Lillian Gresham wrote this recipe into a Methodist church cookbook printed in 1974. 1 cup of Coca-Cola from a glass bottle, not a can, 2 cups of flour, 2 cups of sugar, a stick and a half of butter, 3 tablespoons of cocoa, a cup of miniature marshmallows stirred into the batter, baked in a 13-by-9 pan, a hot fudge icing poured over the cake while it was still warm, made with another half cup of Coke, more butter, more cocoa, and a box of powdered sugar. The marshmallows floated to the top during baking and made a soft, spotted surface like a tide pool. Lillian's recipe appeared on page 47. Her name was printed under it in small capital letters. For a woman whose husband got his name in the newspaper twice, once when he was promoted at the mill and once when he died, that page was the only place she ever saw her name in print. The cookbook sold for $3. It paid for a new church roof. Number 14. Chicken and rice casserole. A pastor's wife in Tulsa, Oklahoma named Frances Kittredge made this for every new family that joined her husband's Church of Christ from 1972 onward. A pound of cooked chicken pulled from a Sunday bird, a cup of minute rice, a can of cream of chicken soup, a can of cream of mushroom soup, a cup of water, a sleeve of Ritz crackers crushed with melted butter on top. Baked 40 minutes. It cost her about $1.85 in 1976 to feed a family of 5. Frances drove it to their house before they had finished unpacking. She knocked, handed it over in a Corningware dish with masking tape on the bottom that said, "Return to Frances," and left without staying to chat. 40 years later, 3 of those families could still tell you exactly what that casserole tasted like, but none of them could remember her husband's first sermon. Number 13. Green bean casserole. The recipe was invented in 1955 by Dorcas Riley in the Campbell's Test Kitchen, but it did not hit full church potluck saturation until the mid-70s. 2 cans of French-style green beans, a can of cream of mushroom soup, a splash of milk, a dash of soy sauce, a can of French's fried onions, half stirred in and half saved for the top. Baked 30 minutes. It was the dish every 11-year-old girl in America learned to make first, because her mother handed her the can opener and said, "Here, you can do this one." That is how a generation of women entered the kitchen, not through a cooking school, not through a cookbook, through a dented can of soup and a mother who needed to set down the potato peeler for 15 minutes. The casserole still exists at Thanksgiving. At a Sunday potluck in 2026, it would look like an artifact on your fellowship hall table. Number 12. Baptist pound cake. the cake that ended every Black Baptist potluck and every AME homecoming Sunday across the South from 1970 onward. A pound of butter, a pound of sugar, a pound of flour, a pound of eggs, no leavening, beaten by hand for 30 minutes until the batter ribboned off the spoon. Baked in a tube pan for an hour and 15 minutes. Cooled on a rack. Wrapped in foil overnight because pound cake tastes better the second day. A grandmother named Alberta Joyner in Greenwood, Mississippi made hers with a teaspoon of almond extract and a teaspoon of lemon, and her slice was recognizable from across the fellowship hall. Every dish at a potluck told a woman's reputation, but pound cake told it in permanent ink. Alberta's handwriting was on the index card, and the index card made it into the Mount Zion AME cookbook of 1977, and the cookbook sat on kitchen shelves across 3 counties. When the women of the church pulled it down, they turned to page 62 without looking. Alberta's pound cake. They did not need the recipe. They knew it by heart. They turned to the page because the page had her name on it. One thing I noticed about church cookbooks kept for 50 years is this. The pages of the recipes people actually used are stained. Butter spots, vanilla rings, a smear of chocolate on the margin. The rest of the book is clean. You can tell whose dishes the women loved by which pages fall open on their own. Alberta's page fell open. It still does. Her granddaughter in Atlanta opened the same book last Easter, and the spine knew where to go. That is what a pound cake recipe actually is. It is a woman's handwriting surviving her by 40 years, held open by the fingerprints of every woman who ever trusted it. Number 11. Sloppy Joes in a chafing dish. A church fellowship coordinator in Flint, Michigan named Geraldine Schatz served these at every Wednesday night youth group supper from 1974 through 1986. 3 pounds of ground beef browned in a cast iron skillet, chopped onion, chopped green pepper, a can of manwich, a squirt of ketchup, a tablespoon of brown sugar stirred in at the end, the whole pot scraped into a silver chafing dish over a sterno burner, kept at a low simmer on a folding table in the church basement, stacks of hamburger buns beside it, paper plates, a kitchen ladle chained to the dish so no one walked off with it. Geraldine's son had died in Vietnam in 1968. The Wednesday night suppers were how she kept walking into a room full of teenagers every week for 18 years. The sloppy joes were the excuse. The teenagers were the reason. Number 10. Pink Fluff Salad. The dish a Methodist women's circle in Des Moines, Iowa made for every bridal shower held in a church parlor from 1972 through the early 80s. A tub of cottage cheese, a box of strawberry Jell-O powder, dry, stirred in, a can of crushed pineapple, a tub of Cool Whip folded through at the end, a handful of mini marshmallows, chilled 2 hours, served in a cut glass bowl, bubblegum pink, impossibly sweet. The fluff salad was the perfect dish for a shower because a young woman about to be married was supposed to eat something that looked like a cloud. It was not really a salad. It was not really a dessert. It was a performance of femininity served in a glass bowl by a woman who had been married 30 years and wanted to tell the bride, without saying a word, that your first year was going to be fine. Number 9. Hot Chicken Salad. A Presbyterian Women's Circle president in Nashville, Tennessee, named Virginia Presley, brought this to every October bazaar at Westminster from 1971 onward. It cost her about $1.75 to make and fed 30 people. 2 cups of cooked chicken, diced. 2 cups of chopped celery. A cup of mayonnaise. A cup of cream of chicken soup. A cup of shredded cheddar. A cup of slivered almonds. A cup of crushed potato chips on top. Baked 30 minutes at 350. It was the dish that confused the men because it was called salad, but it came out hot, and somehow that question was never really answered. Virginia served it with sliced beef tomatoes and a scoop on a lettuce leaf. She brought it in a long pan that had belonged to her mother. The pan had a dent in the corner from a move in 1952, and every time she put it in your oven, she thought about her mother's kitchen. The recipe was the recipe. The pan was the memory. Number 8. Tater Tot Hot Dish. The Lutheran women of Bemidji, Minnesota served this at every funeral luncheon from 1970 onward. 2 pounds of ground beef browned with onion. a can of cream of mushroom soup, a can of cream of celery soup, a bag of frozen mixed vegetables. The whole thing spread in a 9 by 13 pan and covered with a careful grid of Ore-Ida tater tots, placed one at a time in rows, because a funeral hot dish was not a casual hot dish. It was baked 45 minutes until the tots were crisp and gold, kept warm on a card table in your church basement. The Lutheran church ladies did not say much at a funeral. They cooked, they carried. They covered the casserole with a kitchen towel and walked it across the parking lot in the snow. That was the language they had. That was the language everyone in your fellowship hall understood. Number 7. Sweet yeast rolls. A Southern Baptist grandmother in Macon, Georgia, named Eula Mae Benson, made 90 rolls for every church supper at her congregation from 1968 through 1981. A package of Fleischmann's yeast dissolved in warm milk, a stick of butter melted, 3 eggs, a quarter cup of sugar, 6 cups of flour worked in by hand on a floured kitchen table. Let rise 2 hours, punched down, rolled into balls and arranged 3 to a muffin cup in greased tins. Let rise again, baked 20 minutes at 400, brushed with butter while still hot. The rolls came out of your oven the color of a brown paper bag, and the smell in your fellowship hall when the tin was uncovered was the smell of a grandmother's kitchen multiplied by 40. Eula Mae had arthritis in both hands by 1979. She still made the rolls. Her daughter asked her why. She said, "Because nobody else knows how." Number 6. Congealed cherry Coke salad. A Church of God deacon's wife in Bristol, Tennessee named Hattie Whitaker brought this to every dinner on the grounds from 1972 onward. A large box of black cherry jello, a cup of boiling water, a cup of Coca-Cola, a can of pitted dark sweet cherries, drained, the juice saved and stirred in, a block of cream cheese cut into small cubes, chopped pecans, set in a Tupperware mold with a blue lid, unmolded onto a plate with a quick dip in warm water. It came out jiggling like something alive. Purple-black in the middle, studded with pale cubes of cream cheese that looked like icebergs in a dark sea. Hattie made it because her mother had made it, and her mother had made it because the congealed salad was the 1950s way of proving a woman was a modern cook. By 1974, it was already falling out of style. Hattie kept making it because her mother's handwriting was on the index card, and that index card was what kept her mother close to you. Number 5. Strawberry pretzel salad. The recipe appeared in a Wesleyan Church cookbook printed in Akron, Ohio in 1973. A crust of crushed pretzels, melted butter, and a tablespoon of sugar baked for 10 minutes. A middle layer of cream cheese whipped with sugar and folded into Cool Whip. A top layer of strawberry jello poured over frozen strawberries and chilled until set. 3 layers, cut into squares, served in your fellowship hall on a paper plate with a plastic fork. The salt of the pretzels underneath the sweetness on top was the thing that made people come back for a second square. It was called a salad because it had jello in it. And in a 1973 church potluck, the word salad was a category that included anything cold, anything molded, and anything a woman had spent more than an hour making on a Saturday night. Number 4. Chess pie. A Methodist grandmother in Paducah, Kentucky named Ruby Dell Atwood made 3 chess pies every Saturday night from 1970 until 1988 for the Sunday fellowship hour at her church. A stick of butter, melted, a cup and a half of sugar, 3 eggs, a tablespoon of cornmeal, a tablespoon of white vinegar, a teaspoon of vanilla, poured into a Pillsbury pie crust from the freezer section. Baked 40 minutes. The top cracked like dried earth, and the filling underneath was the color of honey in sunlight. Chess pie cost Ruby Dell about 50 cents a pie to make. She sliced each pie into 8 pieces, 24 pieces a week, for 18 years. That was 432 pies by her count, because she kept a tally in a spiral notebook in her kitchen drawer. The notebook is still in the drawer. Her great-granddaughter found it in 2019. Number 3. Macaroni and tomatoes. A Pentecostal grandmother in Elizabethtown, Kentucky named Wilma Jean Estes brought this to every homecoming Sunday potluck from 1971 until 1984. A pound of elbow macaroni, boiled. A quart jar of home-canned tomatoes from her garden, crushed by hand and poured over the pasta. A stick of butter. A teaspoon of salt. A tablespoon of sugar to cut the acid. A shake of black pepper. That was the recipe. That was the whole recipe. It cost her maybe 60 cents to make in 1974, and it fed 20 people easily. The macaroni absorbed the tomato juice, and the butter pooled on top like gold. Wilma Jean had been canning tomatoes every August of her life since she was 9 years old. The jar on your potluck table was a jar from her garden, from her hands, from a summer that was now 6 months gone, showing up on a Sunday in February to prove the garden had happened. Number 2, sour cream pound cake. The cake, a Baptist Women's Auxiliary in Little Rock, Arkansas, served at every wedding reception held in the Fellowship Hall from 1970 onward. 3 cups of flour, 3 cups of sugar, a cup of butter, a cup of sour cream, 6 eggs, separated, whites beaten stiff and folded in last, a teaspoon of vanilla, a quarter teaspoon of baking soda, baked in a greased and floured tube pan for an hour and 20 minutes at 325. Cooled in the pan for 20 minutes and then turned out onto a wire rack. The crumb was the texture of a fine sponge and the crust was the color of a good biscuit. A woman named Hazel Colston made 7 of these every Saturday night in June and July of 1974, which was the summer of 7 Baptist weddings in a row. She was 68. Her wrist gave out in August. But she did not stop baking. She just learned to beat the batter with her left hand. Number 1. Bundt cake with powdered sugar glaze. The bundt pan was invented in 1950, but it took over the American church potluck in the mid-70s. The decade the Pillsbury Bake-Off made the bundt cake a national event. A Lutheran grandmother in St. Cloud, Minnesota, named Gladys Soderberg, made a lemon bundt with a lemon glaze every first Sunday from 1973 through the late 80s. Boxed yellow cake mix, a box of instant lemon pudding, 4 eggs, a cup of sour cream, half a cup of oil, beaten together and poured into a buttered and floured bundt pan. Baked 50 minutes, cooled 10. Turned out onto a cake plate. Glazed with a mixture of powdered sugar, lemon juice, and a splash of milk drizzled over the ridges of the cake. The glaze ran down the fluted sides and pooled in the moat around the base. Gladys's cake was on your fellowship hall table before the organist finished the postlude, and it was always the first cake cut and the first empty plate. A woman in a flowered dress would walk past it with a paper plate in her hand and just smile. That smile was your whole review. Heavenly hash salad is a really, really good salad, unlike the rest of some of these. This fruit-filled salad is a staple of Sunday school gatherings, holiday dinners, and everything else you would ever associate with church gatherings. If you ever thought you needed a boost to your skin, your gut health, or you just needed more fruit in your life in general, this is the dish for you. Chunks of pineapple, the juiciest and freshest mandarin oranges you could find, the ripest maraschino cherries, the kind America's known for, and additional toppings of grapes, marshmallows, bananas, and apples. You could even have a whipped cream base using Cool Whip or sour cream and add in dry fruits for an extra crunch factor. It was pretty much the dream of anyone who liked their meals sweet and happy instead of sour and bitter. You could make this in advance. It looked amazing, and it tasted even better. Yet this still wasn't really the best part of this dish, believe it or not. The actual strength of the heavenly hash salad was the fact that you didn't need any kind of kitchen appliances to really make it. Don't have an oven? This is for you. It meant that a big majority of the population, which didn't have access to things like ovens, could actually enjoy a dessert too, for once. Now, the heavenly hash bit comes from just the way it looks, nothing else. There's no famous folklore or backstory to this one. It just looks like something you'd find behind those pearly white gates we all dream of. Jellied chicken salad was a quintessential 1950s dish that combined cooked chicken with vegetables set in a savory gelatin mold, reflecting the era's fascination with molded salads. This dish often included diced chicken, celery, onions, and sometimes nuts or chopped pimentos, suspended in a flavorful gelatin base made from chicken broth and unflavored gelatin. Served cold and sliced, it was both a visual centerpiece and a tasty salad that showcased creativity and presentation. Jellied chicken salad was often made in advance, allowing flavors to meld and the gelatin to set firmly, making it practical for potlucks and large gatherings. Though it might seem unusual today, at the time it represented a sophisticated and modern way to serve cold salads. The dish balanced texture and flavor with a slightly savory taste and a firm yet tender mouthfeel. Its popularity was tied to the post-war era's emphasis on convenience, novelty, and communal sharing, making it a memorable part of many church potluck tables. Prayerful pasta primavera salad was one of these newcomers, combining tender pasta with fresh, crisp vegetables like bell peppers, cherry tomatoes, and zucchini. Tossed in a zesty Italian vinaigrette, this cold salad brought vibrant colors and refreshing flavors to any gathering, offering a welcome reprieve from heavier dishes. This salad excelled in versatility and practicality. It could be prepared a day ahead, allowing the flavors to meld together beautifully. And it traveled well, perfect for outdoor church picnics. The recipe was also flexible. Any combination of vegetables could be used, depending on what was in season or on hand. Even picky eaters could find something to enjoy in its customizable mix. Add a sprinkle of Parmesan, and it could easily transition from a simple side dish to a more filling option. So, why has it become a rarity? As pre-packaged pasta salads and pre-made dressings became widely available, the labor of chopping fresh vegetables and mixing homemade vinaigrettes seemed less appealing. Modern convenience overshadowed the care that went into making this dish. In the 1970s, dips reigned supreme at church potlucks and family gatherings, and few were as delightfully quirky as dill pickle dip. A creamy blend of sour cream, cream cheese, and finely chopped dill pickles, this tangy appetizer offered bold flavor with minimal effort. Whether served with crackers, chips, or vegetable sticks, it was an unexpected crowd pleaser that stood out among more traditional offerings. This dish emerged during an era when convenience and creativity defined home cooking. Dill pickles had been a staple in American pantries since the early 20th century, and combining them with creamy bases like sour cream or cream cheese was an innovative way to transform basic ingredients into something new. It was practical too, easy to whip up, affordable, and well-suited for large gatherings. So, what happened to this retro favorite? As culinary trends evolved, so did dips. Flashier, more complex recipes featuring exotic ingredients like artichokes and sun-dried tomatoes became the new standard, leaving humble dill pickle dip behind. And for those with pickier palates, the sharp, briny flavor wasn't always a hit. Dill pickle dip evokes nostalgia for an era when recipes were shared on index cards, and the measure of a good potluck dish was how quickly it disappeared. Glory Bedeviled ham spread is a pretty nostalgic dish. It captures the charm that you would commonly associate with the 20th century. Fellowship meals, potlucks galore, dishes that attracted a crowd and left one feeling better than ever. In the midst of all that, deviled ham spread started to really take off. Again, the deviled term here is purely for hyperbole. It just refers to how aggressively seasoned the dish is. The spread typically has things like lots of chopped ham and a bunch of seasonings like Worcestershire sauce, cayenne pepper, paprika, and mustard. People also had a fondness for bell peppers and would pretty much always include them in it. The phrase "glory be" was something that was pretty much just a comforting mantra for religious people. Churches offered people a lot of respite and shelter from a lot of the harsh things going on in the 20th century, and that meant a lot to people who were down on their luck. You could go in for a casserole or a ham spread and leave having your faith in God a bit stronger than it was an hour ago. Watergate salad was a sweet and fluffy concoction that quickly gained popularity in the 1950s as a potluck staple. Named after the famous Watergate Hotel, this salad combined pistachio-flavored instant pudding mix, canned pineapple chunks, whipped topping, and miniature marshmallows for a uniquely textured and flavorful dessert. Its bright green color and creamy sweetness made it visually appealing and a favorite among families. Watergate salad was easy to prepare, requiring no baking or cooking, which made it perfect for busy church members contributing to community meals. The salad's balance of fruit and sweet creaminess offered a delightful finish to savory dishes on the table. It also showcased the growing influence of convenience foods and packaged ingredients that defined mid-century American cooking. Many families passed down their versions of the recipe, sometimes adding nuts or coconut for extra texture. The dish became a nostalgic symbol of 1950s social gatherings, evoking memories of shared meals and the simple joys of fellowship. The 1970s were a golden age for layered desserts, and few could compete with the indulgent simplicity of a dessert built on butterscotch pudding, whipped topping, and a graham cracker crust. This was the era of quick-fix elegance, when convenience foods met the creativity of home cooks determined to make something memorable. Blessed Butterscotch Delight was a perfect example. Rich, creamy, and easy to assemble, it became a favorite at church potlucks and family gatherings. The popularity of butterscotch pudding soared during the mid-20th century, largely thanks to its warm, caramel-like flavor and versatility. Paired with graham crackers, which were already a pantry staple, and whipped topping, a revolutionary product that simplified dessert making, it was a dessert that anyone could whip up with minimal effort. And let's not forget the charm of its layered presentation, which made it feel just fancy enough to stand out on a crowded dessert table. So, why did it fade away? By the 1990s, pre-made desserts and lighter options had taken over. The heavy reliance on processed ingredients didn't help, as health trends began favoring fresh fruits and whole grains over pudding mixes and whipped toppings. During the heyday of church picnics, the fellowship hall often doubled as a proving ground for comfort food creativity. One such creation was a warm, gooey dish that stole the show every time it appeared on the table. A blend of melted cheddar, sweet corn, and creamy ingredients baked to bubbly perfection, this dip embodied everything a crowd pleaser should be: indulgent, shareable, and impossible to resist. Cheddar corn dip transformed canned or fresh corn into a culinary centerpiece, and its simplicity was part of its charm. The ingredients were affordable and readily available, and the recipe could be customized to suit any taste. Add a pinch of spice for heat, or serve it with an assortment of chips and crackers. The possibilities were endless. It also had the rare advantage of being just as good lukewarm as it was fresh out of the oven, making it ideal for long picnic afternoons. So why don't we see this dish anymore? Blame it on changing tastes and the popularity of less labor-intensive store-bought dips. In a world where convenience reigns, the Chapel cheddar corn dip has taken a back seat. But for those who remember its rich, cheesy goodness, it remains a delicious symbol of community gatherings and the joy of sharing a dish made with love. Before we start going deep into what Church Lady 7-layer salads are, let's talk a bit about what a 7-layer salad even really is. As the name implies, it's got 7 actual layers to it, so you can kind of think of this as a quadra-burger, or the lasagna of salads. It's pretty much always served in a glass bowl, and this is meant to work with the presentation and really add some wow factor to the dish. The traditional way to go about making a 7-layer salad is with vegetables like chopped tomatoes, green peas, lettuce, hard-boiled eggs, bacon, onion, and cheese. Besides the obvious aesthetic appeal of something like that, you could also make this salad in advance, and churches were always on the lookout for the kind of dishes you could make and prepare ahead of time because of how busy they were. Now, the 7-lady version is a bit different. In churches, the concept of a church lady had become pretty popular. They were these women who would tend to the churchgoers and often end up being the foundational base of a lot of these potlucks, church gatherings, and neighborhood-wide meals. While it did give them a chance to show off their skills, most of everything you see on this list was really typically made by a church lady. Cheese and pineapple skewers were a popular appetizer that combined sweet and savory flavors in a bite-sized form. These skewers typically featured cubes of sharp cheddar cheese paired with juicy chunks of pineapple threaded onto toothpicks or small wooden sticks. The contrast between the tangy cheese and the tropical sweetness of the pineapple made for an appealing taste experience that was easy to enjoy while mingling at potluck socials. This simple yet elegant dish was quick to prepare and transport, making it a favorite among church members tasked with bringing something festive and shareable. The bright colors of the golden pineapple and pale cheese also added a cheerful touch to the food table, helping to create a welcoming atmosphere. Many cooks used canned pineapple for convenience, especially during winter months when fresh fruit was less available. Despite its simplicity, cheese and pineapple skewers represented the kind of thoughtful, crowd-pleasing dishes that helped build community spirit in mid-century church gatherings. Their popularity endured because they required minimal effort but delivered maximum enjoyment to guests. In the days when nothing went to waste, a pot of slow-cooked beans with hog jowls and onions was a way of life. Rooted in Southern cooking traditions, this hearty meal was a staple at church potlucks and community gatherings. Pinto beans, rich in protein and fiber, were an affordable way to feed a crowd, while hog jowls, a cut from the cheek of the pig, added smoky, savory depth that transformed the humble legume into something extraordinary. Historically, this dish thrived in communities where resourcefulness was key. Hog jowls, often considered a byproduct, were a favorite in Southern cuisine, where the whole hog philosophy reigned supreme. Combined with onions and slow cooking, the result was a dish that was simple yet deeply flavorful. And let's not forget the practicality. Beans are inexpensive, shelf-stable, and could simmer all day while the cook tackled other tasks. But as modern tastes shifted, hog jowls fell out of favor. Health trends, coupled with the rise of leaner meats, left this dish behind in the dust of culinary history. Convenience foods like canned beans and pre-seasoned mixes didn't help either. During the leaner years of the mid-20th century, frugality and ingenuity were staples in the kitchen. Enter the blessed bologna spread, a creamy, tangy concoction made from finely ground bologna, mayonnaise, and chopped pickles. A true testament to making the most of what you had, this spread transformed an inexpensive lunch meat into a flavorful filling for sandwiches or crackers. For church picnics and potlucks, it was a go-to dish, easy to prepare, affordable, and guaranteed to feed a crowd. The beauty of this spread lay in its adaptability. It could be served between slices of soft white bread, stuffed into hollowed-out celery stalks, or simply spooned onto crackers for a quick snack. Bologna itself, once a refrigerator mainstay, offered a rich, salty base that paired perfectly with the zing of pickles. It wasn't fancy, but it didn't need to be. This was food meant to nourish and bring people together, not impress. So, why has this humble spread disappeared? Changing tastes and the bologna stigma, yes, it exists, contributed to its decline. Once hailed as a budget-friendly staple, bologna lost favor to more sophisticated options. Tomato aspic was a long-term mainstay of the 20th century for a few different reasons. It was the best thing you could make out of molded gelatin, at least the most palatable. A lot of people weren't really warming up to having gelatin in their salads because of how it was just too different, and how most of them thought that cold, savory gelatin salads didn't make any sort of sense at all. Despite that, this dish persisted and made a name for itself as exactly that. You would have a tomato soup-based salad served with a really creamy dressing, and the best part was the presentation. People would end up having a lot more fun than they originally expected to have with gelatin. All it took was having a meal and trying it out without someone in your ear telling you how bad it is. Plus, the reason churches really wanted this dish on their menus was because it could work in a number of different ways. You could make a side out of it, a salad or an appetizer. It could even be the centerpiece of your church lunches. And of course, the fact that you could make it ahead of time was wonderful. A lot of churches would actually make this as an Easter special, often with things like cranberry sauces. Cheese and olive relish trays were a simple yet effective way to encourage conversation and sharing at church potlucks. These trays typically featured a selection of cubed or sliced cheeses alongside an assortment of olives, pickles, and sometimes pepperoncini peppers. Arranged attractively on a platter, this combination invited guests to nibble and mingle as they sampled different flavor pairings. The salty, briny taste of olives complemented the creamy, mild cheese varieties, offering a balance of textures and tastes that were appealing and easy to eat with fingers or small forks. These relish trays required little preparation, but made a big impact by adding variety to the potluck spread. They were particularly popular because they did not need heating and could be prepared well in advance, making them convenient for busy hosts. The trays also reflected the growing interest in appetizer-style foods during the mid-20th century, as Americans explored new ways to entertain and socialize around food. In the mid-20th century, prunes enjoyed a moment in the culinary spotlight, and desserts like prune whip became surprisingly popular at gatherings. Light, airy, and subtly sweet, this dish combined stewed prunes with whipped egg whites to create a mousse-like treat that balanced indulgence with a touch of practicality. While it may not sound like the belle of the potluck table today, in its time, it was a creative way to transform a pantry staple into an elegant dessert. Prunes, or dried plums, were widely appreciated for their affordability and long shelf life. They were particularly common in post-war cooking, where resourceful homemakers turned simple ingredients into inventive recipes. With the rise of gelatin-based desserts, prune whip fit right into the trend of light, fluffy textures. It also offered a surprising nutritional bonus. Prunes were, and still are, known for their digestive benefits, making this dessert as functional as it was flavorful. By the late 20th century, however, prune whip fell out of favor. Healthier eating didn't hurt it. Marketing did. Prunes became saddled with a reputation as grandma food, overshadowing their versatility. In the kitchens of the South, where comfort food was practically a calling, one small golden snack became a beloved staple at church picnics and potlucks alike: sausage balls. These bite-sized morsels, made from sausage, cheese, and a touch of baking mix, were the perfect balance of savory and satisfying. They were an art form of resourcefulness, transforming simple pantry staples into something people would talk about long after the picnic ended. Sausage balls gained popularity in the mid-20th century when convenience mixes like biscuit became household essentials. Their practicality was unmatched, easy to make, even easier to transport, and nearly impossible to mess up. Whether served warm from the oven or cooled at room temperature, they held their flavor and texture, making them a no-brainer for any gathering. They doubled as appetizers, brunch sides, or even game day treats. So why did they fall out of favor? Over time, shifting dietary trends and a preference for more elaborate finger foods nudged them off the menu. Today, they are just a reminder of simpler times, when recipes were about taste, tradition, and togetherness, not calorie counts or culinary fads. So, gospel-glazed meatballs were pretty much the go-to holiday party food to go for, and their popularity was really something that was rooted in how simple this dish was. The original grape jelly and chili sauce glaze combination really came from here and broke into the mainstream. Lots of churches, depending on regional differences, preferences, and tastes, would also often use things in place of the typical apricot preserves that people would put in the grape jelly. They'd use orange marmalade or cranberry sauces, and some would make spicier versions instead of the typical super sweet ones. You could add in sriracha and crushed red pepper, or also add in chipotle. Some savory additions like garlic meant for a pretty neat little twist on an otherwise incredible meatball. The thing about meatballs was that as nice as they would also get pretty stale and repetitive. You grow up eating something like that your whole life and coming back home to it for Sunday dinner, then you go to a church and get the same, and it can kind of be a downer, despite how good this alternative way of making them was. Raisin and nut salad was a sweet and textured dish that balanced dried fruits with crunchy nuts, typically served cold at 1950s potlucks. This salad often included raisins, chopped walnuts or pecans, and sometimes shredded celery or apples, all tossed in a light mayonnaise or cream-based dressing. The combination of chewy raisins and crunchy nuts created an appealing contrast that was both satisfying and refreshing. It was an affordable and easy-to-make side dish that added a touch of sweetness to the potluck table without overpowering other flavors. The salad's cool temperature and rich texture made it a welcome complement to hot casseroles and savory mains. Families often passed down their own recipes with small variations, such as the addition of pineapple or marshmallows. This dish captured the nostalgic comfort of mid-century American cooking, where mixing fruits and nuts into salads was a popular way to add variety and nutrition. It remains a fondly remembered part of church potluck history for many. Few dishes from the 1970s could walk the line between savory and sweet quite like this one. Sweet potato soufflé did just that. It was a culinary bridge between vegetables and dessert. With its cloud-like texture, cinnamon-kissed sweetness, and the signature marshmallow topping, it offered both comfort and spectacle at every church potluck or holiday gathering. The dish has deep roots in Southern cooking, where sweet potatoes have been a staple for centuries. During the mid-20th century, this recipe gained widespread popularity as canned goods and convenience foods became kitchen staples. Marshmallows, introduced in the late 1800s and heavily marketed in the 20th century, were the final flourish, a whimsical, sugary topping that turned a simple casserole into a crowd pleaser. Yet, as tastes evolved, the soufflé began to fade from weekly menus. The sugar-heavy marshmallow layer clashed with growing concerns about healthier eating. Sweet potatoes themselves survived the shift, reborn as fries, chips, and roasted sides. But the soufflé, with its unapologetic decadence, became relegated to holiday tables and church cookbook archives. Fresh, vibrant, and undeniably wholesome, fellowship fruit kebabs were a beacon of color on church picnic tables. In an era when gelatin molds and mayonnaise-based salads reigned supreme, these skewers offered a refreshing alternative. Simple yet elegant, they featured a variety of seasonal fruits: pineapple, melon, grapes, and berries, artfully arranged on sticks and drizzled with a honey-lime glaze. The practicality of fruit kebabs was one of their biggest selling points. Easy to assemble, they required no utensils, making them a perfect grab-and-go option for outdoor gatherings. Plus, their versatility made them universally appealing. Whether you preferred tropical fruit, classic apple chunks, or a mix of whatever was on sale, the recipe adapted to suit any budget or taste. Add in the bright, tangy kick of honey and lime, and you had a snack that balanced natural sweetness with a touch of zest. So, what caused this recipe to slip into obscurity? Partly, the rise of pre-cut fruit platters took away the need for the extra effort. Additionally, the modern obsession with charcuterie boards and grazing tables overshadowed the humble kebab. In the 1980s and 1990s, lighter, vegetable-forward dishes began making their way onto picnic tables as health-conscious trends gained momentum. Angel biscuits aren't actually something embellished with intense symbolism from the Bible, but a traditional Southern biscuit. This yeast roll takes baking powder, baking soda, and some yeast to make one of the fluffiest biscuits you'll ever lay your eyes on. This is actually why they ended up being called angel biscuits. It was mostly because people thought it fit since the biscuits were so light and airy. You might be wondering how such a delicate and tender dessert managed to come out of the South, though, and, well, in that regard, I can only say that even the biggest of barbecues need a dessert on the side. Church kitchens would often scour both the South and the North for any kind of recipes that would help them in their efforts. And man, after the absolute nightmare gauntlet that the first half of the 20th century was, there was a lot of room for relief efforts. Angel biscuits rose to popularity in the middle of the 20th century as a dish that was very hard to do wrong and very easy to make, which made it almost perfect for the kind of church gatherings most places were holding back then. Potato salad with dill pickles offered a tangy twist on the classic potato salad and was a beloved side dish at 1950s church potlucks. This recipe typically combined boiled potatoes with mayonnaise, chopped dill pickles, onions, and sometimes hard-boiled eggs, creating a creamy yet zesty flavor profile. The inclusion of pickles added a crisp acidity that brightened the dish and balanced the richness of the dressing. Potato salad was practical and inexpensive to make in large quantities, making it ideal for feeding many at social gatherings. It could be prepared ahead of time and served chilled, which was convenient for church potluck events where refrigeration space might be limited. The salad paired well with a variety of main courses, from barbecue meats to baked casseroles, making it a versatile choice. Its popularity was boosted by its familiar flavors combined with a small element of surprise thanks to the dill pickles. This potato salad remains an iconic part of mid-century American communal dining experiences. It's hard to imagine now, but there was a time when raisins weren't just a snack stuffed into lunchboxes. They were the star of a chilled salad dish. Pair them with crisp celery, a dollop of mayonnaise, and a touch of seasoning, and you've got what churchgoers in the 1970s knew as raisin salad. This wasn't your ordinary potluck dish. It was a blend of sweetness, crunch, and creamy indulgence that stood out in a sea of casseroles. Believe it or not, this dish became a go-to because it was affordable, easy to prepare, and just unusual enough to get people talking. Historically, salads like these reflected the era's obsession with convenience and creativity. Mid-century America saw a boom in recipes that combined unexpected ingredients. Think Jell-O with shrimp or hot dog casseroles. The availability of inexpensive dried fruits, thanks to California's booming raisin industry, made raisin salad both practical and economical for feeding a crowd. Its downfall was changing tastes. By the 1990s, the rise of fresher, lighter fare left mayo-based salads feeling, well, a little heavy. And let's face it, some modern palates weren't ready for raisins mingling with celery. Still, for those who grew up with it, this dish evokes warm memories of church picnics and community gatherings. Mid-century America loved a dish that could pull double duty, easy to prepare and satisfying enough to feed a crowd. Picnic pea salad supreme fit the bill perfectly. This chilled salad, made with sweet green peas, crispy bacon, shredded cheddar, and a creamy dressing, was a real statement. In an era when canned and frozen vegetables were kitchen staples, this salad offered a way to transform humble peas into something extraordinary. It became a picnic regular, especially in the Midwest, where hearty and easy-to-make recipes reigned supreme. What made this dish so practical was its adaptability. The ingredients were pantry-friendly, the preparation was straightforward, and it held up well outdoors. No one likes a salad that wilts before the blessing. Its sweet and savory flavors appealed to kids and adults alike, and its vibrant colors made it visually appealing on any potluck table. Plus, bacon and cheddar, arguably the ultimate crowd-pleasing duo, did a lot of the heavy lifting. So, what happened? Well, somewhere along the line, supreme salads lost their shine. Health-conscious trends and the rise of pre-made options nudged recipes like this into obscurity. Missionary chicken pot pie is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's a community dish that really just has the missionary label added on for fluff, but at its core, it really is just your average chicken pot pie. You get the usual shtick and suspects here too. Shredded, diced chicken that's either prepared fresh or gets left over from Sunday roasts, and then you also have vegetables like carrots, celery, and potatoes. You get onions, green beans, and then you get things like a nice little chicken broth in a pie crust and a biscuit topping to really tie it all together. The idea behind this one-dish meal was to make something that could feed entire groups and specifically be used just for that. You might think that could be said about almost everything on this list, but the truth is, a lot of these recipes had to be fine-tuned and adapted to the amount of people there were. This, on the other hand, was a dish that was designed specifically for situations like that. It was a really common idea to make this in the winter when people needed warmth and comfort more than anything, especially the rural communities in America at the time. Chicken pot pies weren't just dominating church gatherings and tables. They were also the standard dinner you would come to expect at home, too. Maybe that's why this dish really fell out of touch with the tastes of the overall crowd. Can't have the same thing at God's home and yours, after all. Baked spaghetti casserole was a hearty and satisfying dish that quickly became a crowd favorite at 1950s potlucks. This casserole combined cooked spaghetti noodles with a tomato-based sauce, often enriched with ground beef or sausage and plenty of cheese to bind it all together. The entire mixture was baked until bubbly and golden on top, making it a warm, comforting meal that fed many with a single dish. Because it could be assembled ahead of time and easily reheated, it was a practical choice for busy families contributing to church dinners. Ingredients were typically budget-friendly and accessible, allowing cooks to stretch ground meat by combining it with pasta and vegetables like onions or green peppers. This casserole also appealed to children and adults alike, with its familiar flavors and satisfying texture. It was often served alongside salads, breads, or vegetable sides to round out the meal. Baked spaghetti casserole embodied the potluck spirit of sharing and community nourishment, reflecting the wholesome, home-cooked meals cherished in that era. Mildred Harlow drove home from that last January potluck in 1982 with an empty casserole carrier on the passenger seat. The masking tape with her name was still stuck to the side. She lived another 11 years. She never cooked for a crowd again. The church reopened briefly in 1985 for a funeral and then closed for good. The fellowship hall was sold to a plumbing supply company. The long folding tables went to a flea market in Augusta. The 1974 Mount Olive cookbook with her handwriting on page 22 is still in a storage unit somewhere, the pages stained with butter and vanilla and the faint blue of her ballpoint pen. And here is the part that surprised me. These 25 recipes are not gone because the food stopped tasting good. They are gone because the women who made them stopped being asked to. Make one of them for your own table this week. Bring a pound cake to a neighbor who lost someone. Carry a casserole across a parking lot in a bath towel. Tell me in the comments which dish your grandmother brought and which page of which cookbook falls open on its own when you lift it off your own shelf. Because these were never just recipes. They were handwriting. They were how a woman in a flowered dress said, "I was here."